Hi everyone, this is Anita Ladhani. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and an energy practitioner, and I want to talk to you about death and grief. Heavy topics. I'm sure many of you are just about to turn off and go watch something else. But if you're still watching, it's probably because you've been impacted or affected by death and grief in some way at some point in your life. Now, unfortunately, whether we want it or not, all of us are going to be impacted by death and grief if we haven't been already. Everything that lives is going to die. It's really that simple, everything. And when you've lost someone close to you, and you've experienced, the loss, the death of someone, it really, that grief is something, a pain that you've never experienced. And for whatever reason, unfortunately, we don't talk about this in our communities. We don't talk about it in our societies. Unless you're affected by it, you really just don't want anything to do with it. So if you're watching, chances are you're watching because you've been affected by it, or you know someone very near and dear to you who has been affected by it, which is why you are even watching this, because otherwise it's just too depressing. Right? It's really just too depressing. And it is depressing. So let's understand this whole process of losing someone. Let's understand the stages of grief so that we can better empathize for those that, or we can better understand what we're going through. Okay? So when the stages of grief are, first we're in denial, and this is not just the stages of grief, but this is the stages of anything traumatic that happens to us in our life. So we first were, they're not necessarily in that order, but they tend to be, in somewhat of that order. So denial is the first step. No, we don't want to accept that they're gone. We don't want to accept that, that something tragic has happened. We don't want to accept the loss, the reality of it. Then there's plea bargaining. Okay, we'll say, oh God, if you just bring them back, if you just give me another minute, if you just, undo what you've done, I'll do anything. I'll fast for 40 years, or I'll do 40 days, or I'll do this and I'll do that. We plea bargain with God. Then there's anger, right? How dare you, God? You are such a mean, punishing God. How could you do that? How could you, take someone who is so loving and so kind and so innocent away from us? There's depression is a stage where you just hurt. Your heart you're broken. Your heart feels so heavy. You literally just want to pull the covers over your head and not get up. You just want to go to sleep. You just don't want to deal with anyone. You don't have the energy. Your bones hurt. That's your deep, deep depression. It's just this deep heaviness, this sadness. And it may not be that intense for some. For some, it may be just, just loss of appetite, not wanting to shower or do anything, just completely losing any interest in life as you knew it. And then finally, there's acceptance, right? And even if there's acceptance, a lot of times what happens is you go back and forth between those different stages. You go back to anger. You go back to, denial. You go back to, someone might say, how can they be, right? How can they? It happens, guys. That's the extreme form. But you go back to, depression and acceptance and plea bargaining, and you go back and forth between the stages. And the only intention of me doing this video is just to help you understand that there's no expiration date on grief. Okay? And I know some of us, with all our good intentions, have said some ridiculously insensitive things to people who are grieving. Okay? I've heard people say things like, oh, well, he's been dead for 3 years. Now you should get over it. Why are you still sad and depressed? Come on, get on with it. I've had people say, things like, you just snap out of it. You need to, just get up, go do something, and go do something with yourself. Stop being so depressed all the time. as if being depressed is a choice, as if feeling this empty void in your life for someone that you loved and cared for is a choice. No, grief comes in waves, like, the waves of an ocean, unpredictable. You think you're fine and everything's going okay, and all of a sudden, you read something, or you hear something, or you hear a song, or maybe just it's a thought that reminds you of your loved one, and you burst into tears, or you just completely feel weak. It's okay. Allow yourself to grieve. Allow yourself to cry. And so let's talk about crying. A lot of times people think, and this is like when I go to funerals and I hear people saying, oh, don't cry, you're hurting, the soul of the deceased. I just want to slap people, because nothing is further from the truth. Where did that even come from? That we're hurting the soul of the deceased when we're crying? That's some bullcrap. I'm sorry, that's not true. What really is going on is that we're not comfortable with someone crying, because when we see someone crying, it triggers in us sadness, and it triggers in us all our pent up sadness and depression that we haven't dealt with. And it's like we're so filled with our own grief and sadness that when we see someone else cry, we're afraid we're going to fill up completely and overflow, and we won't be able to contain ourselves. So because we are selfish, and because we don't want to fall apart, because we think that being strong and not crying is a sign of strength and some kind of achievement, we prevent others from crying and grieving and falling apart. And the reality is, cry. Crying is the best thing you can do for yourself. Let me explain why. There's a study done on tears. They went to funerals, scientists went to funerals, hospitals where, people were losing loved ones, tragic accidents, and they went and collected these tears in little test tubes. And they went then to, babies being born, weddings, graduations, and they collected the happy tears. And they took it back to the lab and they studied the content of it. And what they found was that the sad tears had a significant high levels of toxins in them, while the happy tears had very minimal toxins in them. So the conclusion was what? The conclusion was, when we're actually crying, we're flushing these toxins out of our bodies. So we're actually doing a great thing, a very healthy thing for our physical body by crying. Because when we don't release these toxins out of our body, then guess where these toxins go? They're not coming out through the tears, through our eyes. So where are they going? Where they're staying in our body, right? So then what happens? Well, they go into different parts of our body. That's, of course, depression and mental illness and anxiety comes from that. But then also you get high blood pressure, heart disease, cancer, diabetes, whatever. There's Dr. Candace Pert, who passed away, was a researcher, and she studied molecules of emotion. What she identified and discovered that certain emotions had a specific molecular shape and framework. And there's a book called The Molecules of Emotion, if you guys want to actually read it. It's by Dr. Candace Pert, CandacePert. And so this is not something, that is just we're imagining or we're making things up. There's a whole movement of education that's happening through movies on Netflix and different social media. I mean, what is it? I just saw on Amazon Prime, there's a movie called Heal on Netflix, which basically talks about energy medicine. What is energy medicine? It's all the stuff that, Reiki and theta healing and all the stuff, the Tai Chi, and it's all the energy work that I practiced some of it, right? And our great grandfathers and our, the East, a lot of that has already, always been, we've been doing it, but we kind of shunned away from it because we've gone to modern medicine. But guys, get back to the basics, get back to crying, get back to allowing yourself to grieve, mourn. It's okay. Take time to just be. I had you know, in my position in the ER, you know, sometimes I get called in to work with, you know, trauma where families have lost loved ones. And I genuinely consider it such an honor and a privilege to be able to do that work, to hold space for families when they're at some of their life-altering, you know, moments, you know, and I've had, you know, the privilege of being part of a family discussion where, you know, a husband has lost his wife and now he's figuring out how he's going to raise his kids, or you know, parents have lost their babies, you know, or a, you know, a wife has lost her husband and the kids have lost their father, you know. And recently I had that happen, unfortunately a little too common, but you know, the mother, I walked in the room and she was a fellow professional, she was a therapist in, you know, in her own life, and she said, you know, what do I do now? You know, how do I raise my kids? How do I do this? You know, and the response is one day at a time. Simple. One day at a time. 1 hour at a time. One moment at a time. That's all. That's all. Because when you're going through grief, when you're just in that, give yourself, be gentle with yourself, be kind to yourself. You know, we're so quick to give it to others, but we don't give it to ourselves. Be kind to yourselves. And if you're not comfortable with it, if someone else is, get help. You know, watching this video hopefully will help you. But you know, it's a natural, unfortunately, part of life is death. It's just part of life. All of us will die. All of us will lose family members. It's not easy. It's not fun. It's not a pretty subject, but that's life. And, you know, hopefully you get the support. You surround yourself with loved ones. You know, surround yourself with positive people. You know, if you know you've got family members or you've got friends who are toxic and they just are negative, set boundaries. I'm not telling you to completely cut them out of your lives, but set boundaries. What are setting boundaries? Decide when you want to pick up the phone call when they call. You don't have to pick up the phone call every time somebody calls you just because they're calling you. You can respond with a text, you know, saying, hey, I'm not available right now. You don't owe anyone an explanation. There should be no compulsion in life. You shouldn't have to do something because you feel forced to. Do it because you want to. And taking care of yourself is really, really important. Because if you don't take care of yourself, how can you extend that to other people around you? So I hope this has been helpful. Again, I'm always available. And I pray that, you know, life is kind to you. And if you've experienced loss and grief, that you allow yourself the space and the time to grieve, however many months, weeks, years, it's okay. Remember, it comes in waves. So, you know, unfortunately, when we go through something traumatic or painful, that's when our circle becomes even smaller, because we really find out who is our support and who is depleting us or not understanding us. And that's okay. That's okay. Again, that's God clearing the way and bringing you people in your life that are positive and understand this and are there to support you. So keep those people close and let go of the ones that are toxic. Love and light. Take care. God bless.